AI has become a lot better over time. The ads you see on Instagram, on Google, etc., all AI driven, increasingly, right? There's no human sitting out there and trying to figure out, or no algorithm, no heuristic-based system. It's all machine learning, and this is where we've seen massive gains over the years. Second thing which became big after ChatGPT is what we all of us sort of know and understand AI as generative AI, right? So it's the next big thing. Now, generative AI, early days in corporate India, we are trying to leverage AI, generative AI in many functions. One function where we are using a lot of generative AI is marketing.
Okay.
So a lot of our ads are being created through AI. A lot of ad films are being created through AI, right? Earlier, I mean, of course, not the TV films, but let's say some of the films we run on platforms like Instagram and Meta, etc., Facebook, etc. The shorter versions, etc., all done in-house, all done with AI. And films which used to cost 10, 20 lakhs to make earlier now can be produced in maybe 1 lakh, 1.5 lakhs through AI, using AI, right? And they're very good. And we are getting better and better at it. We are
lots of money.
Yeah. So generative AI. So again, many use cases. So we are developing, in our customer service function, we are beginning to use a little bit of generative AI. Early days again, we are running pilots. In fact, in many parts of the company, humans are competing with agents, right? Because we have a process which is being run through people, and then they are also experimenting with AI agents to see where we land up. And the last thing we are doing now is what we call agentic AI, right? So the way Naukri runs, for example, right now, how recruiters use Naukri is they log into our database, they search resumes, then they modify the search if they don't get the right resumes, and they do the search again. Then they figure out, okay, these are the people we want to contact. Then they pick up the phone and talk to those people, sometimes write emails to them, and then if they hear back from them, they talk to them, then sometimes they're able to get through, sometimes they're not able to connect, then they call again, etc. So the whole process can sometimes take a few days. Now with agentic AI, we're running pilots with companies where the AI does everything for you. So you just give us the JD. Okay, this is what you're looking for. And the AI will say, sometimes the AI can even help you do with the JD. So the JD can also be done through AI. You just tell them what you're looking for, and it knows the history, it knows what kind of company you are, where you have traditionally hired from, what kind of roles you have, right? Because we have their history, we have the data of these companies, they've been working with us for several years. Then the agentic AI shows you some CV, do these guys look good? And you say, yes, I like these 3, I don't like these 2. And then it searches the database, it contacts the people, it even calls them up. It even asks them a few questions to assess them.
Okay.
And then it gives you a short list, all done in a few hours. What used to take a few days earlier can now be done in a few hours. So that's where it's going. Now, some of these, like I said, where are areas where we've seen massive gains, others are experiments. Some are commercialized, some are getting there. But this is the kind of stuff which is happening in our company, and I'm sure will happen in every data-rich company after a while.
Okay. Yeah. Is the same happening with Jeevansathi.com as well?
Absolutely. Jeevansathi, even pricing is all AI-driven. Okay. So the AI tracks you, it knows, okay, we gave you 2 matches, and you came back to the platform maybe 5 times in the last 1 month, and therefore you are very engaged, and therefore we can charge you more. On the other hand, somebody who's not been visiting the site very often, it can give a discount. If you are a very heavy user, you get 20 matches, 0 discounts. You're getting a lot of value from the platform. A lot of this is now AI-driven.
Okay.
No human involvement.
Sure. And in terms of the audience, how they are picking this trend up. So, if we ask about the number of paid customers who would have increased for such kind of services, is there an uprise in that?
In these AI services?
Yes.
So a lot of the AIs are the back end. You don't even know it's AI. As a user, you don't know. But what ends up happening as a result of these recommendations or better search results or better matching is that people engage more with the platform. They get more value. They come back more often. They're able to make more hires through Naukri. They're able to find the right match through Jeevansathi, etc., etc. And therefore, they see more success. And when they see more success, it allows us to up our price to the customer. So that's how we get value. Okay. So we're not pricing the AI separately, but because the AI is helping them do their job better, faster, we are able to charge higher prices.
Okay.
for what we were offering earlier, right? Because the service has become a lot better. Now, some new products we've developed using AI, like this automation tool I told you about. It's called AI Rex, right? Now, that's in commercial beta. We are charging for it, and we've just taken it to market. And let's see how much the customers are willing to pay for it, right? Yeah. So we're beginning to monetize AI offerings also. We, for example, have a mock interview service on Naukri now. So you can upload your CV and tell Naukri that, listen, I'm looking to interview for this job. So it'll start asking you questions, and it'll prepare you for the interview, right? And they'll tell you how you're doing. And some stuff is free, but beyond that, you have to pay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So I also want to touch upon your association with Ashoka and Plaksha University. So, I mean, in what way is it helping you beyond, of course, I mean, as a mentor and the way your association lies? Is it also helping you in your talent pool as well?
Early days, for both Ashoka and Plaksha. See, I got involved with Ashoka over 12, 14 years ago and 11, 12 years ago. And with Plaksha, I've been sort of working very closely for the last 8 years now from the time we started.
Okay.
The idea here is to build world-class universities in India and to provide world-class education out of India, right? I went to IIT back then. It was very cheap. I didn't realize it at that time. But on hindsight, I paid, on a monthly basis, I was paying less for my IIT education than I was paying in school.
Okay.
That's how cheap higher education was at that time. Continues to be very cheap if you go to a government college.
Yeah.
So it's being subsidized by the government.
Yes.
But unfortunately, what's started happening over the last 10, 15 years is that a lot of kids have started going overseas for their undergrad. So during my time, you went overseas for higher education for your masters, and only a few people went. And you went only if you could get a scholarship. As India has become richer, people have started going early, right? So there are so many kids now who start going overseas for their undergrad, and then they often don't come back. And they go overseas for two reasons. One, because it's very hard to get into the IITs and into these government colleges because so competitive, and they haven't really grown so much over time. And two, the quality of education abroad is so much better than what you get in India. So the idea behind both Ashoka and Plaksha is to provide that quality at affordable prices in India, right? And that's how we, and that's the 20-year goal, right? Both of them are off to a very good start, and they are graduating excellent students. So Ashoka's already graduated a few batches, and Plaksha just graduated its first batch. We've done some hiring from these places, but right now it's very early days. The batch sizes are small. Like Plaksha, first batch was only 80 kids.
Okay.
1/3 went for higher education. Only 50 sort of took up offers in industry. Ashoka is now much bigger. It's graduating, 700-800 students a year. Plaksha, this year the intake will be 235. There's 235 kids will grow. So as they grow and they graduate more students, and these students start getting into industry, see, because the education here is world class, and it's take Plaksha for example. The courses there are all very futuristic.
Okay.
So there are just 4 majors at Plaksha. It's a new age engineering school: CS and AI,
Okay.
robotics and autonomous systems,
Okay.
biosystems engineering, and economics and data science. That's it. So all very forward looking. And hopefully, as India starts investing more in technology, as there are more startups, and as more new age companies emerge out of India, they will require this kind of talent, people who are trained in these areas and these skills like we were talking earlier.
Yeah.
And they will go to these schools and hire. That's the hope. Yeah.
Okay. But as a business leader, Hitesh, how does it add to your personal value? I mean, in terms of being associated with academic institutes.
No, I am not, so for me, it's more like giving back. Like I said, I went to college, somebody subsidized my education. Unfortunately, the education system in India has, been slow to adapt to the changing sort of requirements of industry. I think we need, like I said, more cutting edge stuff to be taught in these sort of programs. We need more hands-on experiential education in India. In Indian education tends to be very bookish and very theoretical, right? And especially for engineering, that doesn't work. And I think we need to, we need more industry connect with academia. In India, you don't see educational institutions work with industry, right? In our 25 years of existence, we have not worked with any university, right? And, I think that has to change. If India has to innovate, if we have to build new products out of India, if you have to, do deep tech work out of India, if you have to, and the geopolitical situation is also changing, right? So if you want to do defense tech, space tech, manufacturing,
Yeah.
if you want all this to happen in India, the industry needs to work very closely with academia. And lastly, we need to inculcate an entrepreneurial mindset in students, right? So that today, all the talk is about, acha, kitni salary mili, what was the average CTC of the batch which graduated, etc., etc. It's okay. I mean, 90% of the people, that's fine. But at least every institution should be graduating 10 or 20% of the people who want to become entrepreneurs, right? Who are willing to take a risk, who are willing to innovate. But that education has to be imparted early. That mindset has to be developed early on, right? And that's what we are trying to do through these institutions. And I think now we run an investment program, for example. We are investors in over 120 startups,
Yes.
right? And that number is only going to grow.
Yeah.
So if there are good quality sort of startups, that ultimately also will help our business because, we'll create new companies out of India and hopefully we'll invest in some of them.
Sure.
But that's a long shot. That's not why we are doing this.
Okay, sure. And with this, I also want to throw open the floor for questions in case there are any questions we want to take in between.
Well, we can accommodate one question and then others offline. Yeah.
Wanted to ask you that, while establishing InfoEdge, or if you know of any other, stories as well, what was that one technique that you used to build that founding team? Because team is extremely important.
Technique. So, to be honest, we were, at that time, it was all about survival, right? Because I'm talking about 25, 27 years ago. We were not even trying to build a large company. We were not trying to build a unicorn. There was hardly any venture capital available, right? And nobody wanted to work for a startup back then in 2000. It is not like how it is today. I mean, there are hundreds of VCs, thousands of mentors, billions of dollars of capital available. It was not like that in those days. So for us, it was all about ki yaar, basically, if you knew people, only then, were they would they want to work with you? Because why would anybody want to join a company which is, doing zero revenue, there's no funding, okay, may succeed, may fail, so that was the different era. So back then it was about, partnering with friends, with family members, people you knew through your network, right? And that's how you found people you could work with, right? And then, of course, you also needed to hire junior people to work for your company. And that was, again, very, very hard. It was not easy to get people to work with you. So it was, again, about working very closely with them. See, the one advantage people have in a startup is they get to work with founders very closely. I'm talking about junior people and young people who join you. It doesn't happen in a big company. So that's how, so the early team, the initial team, was all people who sort of knew each other through either where they went to the same school or there was a family connection or somebody recommended somebody. It was people who were within the network who believed in the idea, who sort of came together to partner. And the young people were like, we found them through Naukri, we found them through other sort of platforms. And, once we found them, we worked very hard to keep them because we knew how difficult it was to attract them at that time. So, and they stayed because they got to work on new ideas, on new concepts, they got to work with founders. In which other company can a junior person, in a large company, junior people don't get to work with very senior people. That it happens every day in a startup. And as a result, what happens is they learn a lot faster, they learn a lot more, and they develop very quickly. And that's what keeps them going. And of course, lastly, you have to be generous about sharing wealth, right? Because the reason people join startups is, one, of course, they want to do exciting work. Two, also they believe that, one day the company will become very large and they'll have a role to play in it and they'll be rewarded for it. So Luckily, at least even today, all startups have very attractive ESOP plans, and these plans are well understood. But back then, actually, nobody even wanted ESOP.
Yes.
Right? They said, "यार, अब हमें 25,000 रुपए extra cash दे दो साल का. We are happier. We don't want stock." So I remember in some cases we gave them the cash also, and we said, "Don't take the stock also, yeah, who knows?" Right? And then they thanked us 10 years later.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So one last question.
Okay. Can we quickly hand over the mic? I'll do my.
There's a question.
Hi, this is Ankit. How do you balance between profitability versus a niche product in the initial time of the startup? Like product quality versus the profitability.
Product quality.
Yeah. So where we have to focus more between the quality or versus making the profit in the initial stage of the career?
Yeah, see, my take on this is that in any successful, if you want to build a successful business, you need to get your product market fit right, right? And what does product market fit mean actually? Because a lot of people talk about product market fit. If your product is in demand, right, and if people come back on their own for it, right, to use it, you got it right. Right? So on the other hand, if you have to work very hard to sell it and to get people to use it, it's hard, right? Because what happens with that is your customer acquisition cost goes through the roof, retention rates are poor, customers are not happy, they're not coming back on their own, so you have to work harder and harder. So I think every startup should work very hard to establish product market fit, right? Now, if that means investing in product quality, you have to invest in product quality. Now it could mean different things for different businesses. Like in the case of Naukri, we needed jobs on the if you don't have enough jobs on the platform, nobody's going to come to your platform, right? On the other hand, if you get the jobs but you don't get the resumes, you don't get the job seekers, the people who posted jobs will not come back again. Right? So we have to work very hard in the beginning to get both jobs and job seekers on the platform. And I understand that you need to make money, you need to survive, etc., etc. But if you become too greedy and you start charging a lot, then you don't get the jobs, right? So the product will not work; those people will not come back. So in the beginning, we made it very cheap for people to post jobs on the platform, and in fact, we used to take jobs from newspapers and put them on the platform, free of cost, right? As well. So, and when and what happened as a result was we had the largest jobs database in the country. And that got job seekers to us because they could not find those jobs in one place anywhere else. I mean, back then we used to compete with newspapers, right? So imagine all the jobs from Times of India, from the Hindu, from the Deccan Herald, from Telegraph, from all the newspapers in the country in one place plus more, right? And that for us was a great product offering, and that for job seekers was also a great proposition, and that used to get them to the platform again and again without us having to market very aggressively to them. And once they came on the platform, the people who had posted those jobs got good response, and they were able to hire people, and they were happy, and they posted even more jobs, right? So so that got us product market fit. That's what I call product market fit. We got it right. Now, if we had made job posting very expensive in Naukri, on Naukri at that time, we would not have gotten all the jobs, right? Somebody else would have come in and said, listen, I'm cheap, post all the jobs there, and then everybody would have got, all the job seekers would have gone to that platform. So it's a balancing act, right? You have to ensure that you have a product which people want and which people demand and for which people come back. If you are able to do that, you have a business, right? And if it means investing in product quality, you have to do it.
So every business has the competitor like Amazon, Flipkart, Blinkit, but I see only the LinkedIn is the platform which don't have any competitor. So any highlight for this? Why, like in context of the same question I have asked, like product versus the quality.
Yeah, no, everybody. So LinkedIn has competition in actually depends on how you view LinkedIn. If you LinkedIn has 2 or 3 business models, right? It makes money from jobs. It makes money from advertising, right? In the advertising business, actually, LinkedIn is a tiny player. There is a lot of competition. There's competition from Meta, there's competition from Google, there's competition from Instagram. It competes with every company out there. Every big advertising sort of player out there for advertising dollars. It's actually a tiny player in that space. In the jobs business, it has competition from Naukri in India and from Indeed and many other players globally, right? Yes, there is no other player there aren't too many players which have a business model which is similar to LinkedIn. The LinkedIn product is differently built from other products because it's a networking platform, and there aren't too many other professional networking platforms in the world. But it has competition, right? In every area, right? Now, why aren't there too many networking platforms? Because it's a network effect business, right? So once there is a networking platform which becomes big, it's very hard to build another networking platform unless and until you have a great customer proposition. Why would somebody build another profile somewhere else, right? Unless you do it very differently. Now, unfortunately, not many players have been able to disrupt LinkedIn, right? But let's see. With AI, who knows?
Okay, Hitesh, so now we have to conclude the session. So before that, I just want lastly one leadership lesson from you, which you can partake with our audience today.
One leadership lesson. I think one of the things I learned a long time back, or maybe some time back, was that, and I don't know who, I should admit somebody, I don't know who said this, but I learned a long time back that in the long term, culture is strategy for breakfast. So a lot of people focus on strategy. A lot of people, companies focus on strategy, but unless and until you have the right culture, things don't work out. So in our case, if you want to be innovative, if you want to be constantly doing new things, I believe that, you need to have an open and empowering culture. Yeah. You need to be data-driven, not hierarchy-driven, right? People should be allowed to fail. People should be allowed to speak their mind. It should not be that, what the guy at the top says is what is always going to happen. So it has to be an environment where people are just free to do what they think makes sense. They should be able to walk up to anybody and speak to anybody, right? So these are small things which perhaps don't matter so much in the early days, right? But as a company grows, become more and more important.
Absolutely, yeah. I agree. And I must congratulate you for building a company not just with strategy, but with your heart. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.